Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Should you hire like a pro sports team? Atta Tarki will tell us the answer. Atta, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me on, Bill.
Now, you have a great book, and I really enjoyed it, as I was telling you before the show, Evidence-Based Recruiting. And everybody listening is either an employer or an employee. I don't think there's too many who miss out on either group. And you say that the team with the best players wins. But we actually skip this in the real world. Can you explain what you mean by that and why we do that?
Absolutely. What happens in the real world is what I call the Miller-Lire illusion of recruiting. Are you familiar with that illusion, Bill?
I'm not.
So it's this illusion where you have two lines that are the same length, but one has arrows pointing inwards and one has arrows pointing outwards.
Oh, okay. You have that in your book. Yes, okay.
Exactly. And most people have seen that illusion a million times, but every time they see it, they can't help but to think, are those two lines really the same length? And when I put that illusion in my book, I measured the two lines 5 times to make sure that they actually were the same length, because it's something that happens with the eyes and you actually think that they might be different lengths. And that's what happens in recruiting, where a lot of companies talk about the fact that they want to have the best team and that their people make the biggest difference in their company. And they say things like, our people are our greatest asset and our biggest differentiators are our people. But in reality, what they do instead is that they don't act that way. Some companies that put out statements like this are Sears and Frontier Communications, and based on their reviews left on the door on the website Glassdoor.com, they were rated the worst companies to work for.
Interesting. Now, you say a common approach is to recruit above-average talent, which sounds pretty good, and train them. Is that wrong, or does that not work?
Yeah, I call that the Karate Kid approach, where you find someone who's pretty good and then you spend a lot of time on trying to train and coach and mentor them to turn them into a superstar. And in my experience, that rarely works. The better approach is the Moneyball approach, where you obsess about finding superstars to begin with, and that's a much more successful approach to building a winning team.
Now, Moneyball, we probably have some fans who aren't sports fans, and maybe because that was a few years ago, can you bring us up to date? What's the Moneyball approach? What does that mean?
Yeah, Moneyball was this awesome book by Michael Lewis and a phenomenal film by the same name about the Oakland A's, who was one of the poorest teams in baseball, and their general manager, Billy Beane, by obsessing about hiring the most undervalued performers in baseball and throwing out all the different kind of like old recruiting techniques that they used to use in baseball, and instead following a more evidence-based approach, data-driven approach to their recruiting, and a less intuitive approach, managed to recruit all these players that other teams were disregarding for various reasons. And by applying this approach, even if they were one of the poorest teams in baseball, they made it to the finals 2 years in a row. And that's what Moneyball is about.
And you're advocating that businesses, and of course you have great background for it, you say Google and Netflix take this approach, and I think we all find that they're doing pretty well, right?
That's right. I experienced this on a very personal level when I was working as a strategy consultant in media and entertainment for years. And one day something a little bit remarkable happened. The Blockbuster store where I would spend my Sunday afternoons browsing through the aisles closed down. And me working as a consultant in media and entertainment, I knew that Netflix was the company behind this. And it made me ask myself, why is that? Why did Blockbuster, a $6 billion company, go bankrupt because they had a small disruptive innovator in the industry? And in theory, that shouldn't be able to happen, right? The Goliath should be able to fend off the little, tiny startup company.
We would think so, right? Yeah.
Yeah. What did Netflix have that Blockbuster lacked? Now, some people would argue like, oh, Netflix had a better strategy, they had better distribution model, better technology, but why? Why did Netflix have all these things? Because they had better talent. That's what it comes down to.
And I think, to me, it was fascinating because I'm reading your book. I'm saying, this is just, of course, you use the sports analogy and in other places in the book, but this is just what we're seeing. And we're seeing big teams play millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, and we're kind of shocked. A quarterback, a pitcher, in fact, maybe even more so, at least a quarterback tries to play every game. We know from the beginning of the year the pitcher will only be involved in maybe 1 out of every 4 or 5 games, and that pitcher isn't going to last the whole game. We're lucky today if the pitcher is in there for half of the game, and yet we're offering that man $100 million for 5 or 6 years, $200 million, maybe even as much as $300 million. Mm-hmm. Now, your title is Evidence-Based Recruiting. And it's an interesting title, but I'm saying to myself, isn't that what we do anyway? I mean, is that something remarkable that it's based on evidence? If someone would come to me for a job, I would talk to them a little bit, see if they went to a school that, had the right background, whether it's a school for teachers or lawyers or accountants. Perhaps find out if we had something in common. Maybe we both like to golf or ski. Isn't that what everybody does, or is this something totally new?
I would argue that what most people do is the intuitive approach to recruiting. What you just described is the intuitive approach to recruiting, where you've built up a lot of great knowledge throughout your life. You've had a lot of experiences, and you built a great intuition for how to hire folks. That intuition is valuable, and baseball teams that in many ways invented the evidence-based approach in sports are still using scouts because that intuition is still really valuable. But what you can do is to apply kind of like a more fact-based, numbers-driven, data-driven approach to augment that intuitive approach and apply both things. And that becomes an evidence-based approach. And the analogy I use is if you go to the doctor, you don't want them to take a scientific approach, nor do you want them to take a fully intuitive approach. What you want them is to apply evidence-based approach. You don't want to say, doctor, I have back pain, and them saying, great, I'm going to set up a 20-year-long double-blinded study to find out why. That's the scientific approach. And the intuitive approach is just like, okay, based on my own experience, you should do this. You want them to distill all the fact base, ask you a few insightful questions, and say, the scientific fact base says this, and I'm going to make a real-time decision, and based on that, make an evidence-based decision for you, and you should go and try this treatment.
I always like it when you put the doctor in there because we all know what that's like, and we want to go to the doctor and have it done quickly and painless. Just give me a pill and make the appendix go away, or the brain tumor or the heart attack or anything else. Now, Atta, let me ask you, if I read correctly in your book, this new area of recruiting is actually called talent acquisition analytics. Is that the right term?
Absolutely, yes.
So just like the sports teams, again, we always hear the analytics department now and get the mathematicians, and they know how many baskets a team is going to make from the left side, the right side, how many pitches a pitcher can pitch before he gets tired. This is what's happening in recruiting. Is that right?
That's right. But there are limits to that in recruiting in the business world, because in sports, all that data is public. And not only public for the past performance of the player, but also future performance of the player. If you hire someone in baseball, you decide not to hire them, you will still see how they perform for the other team. You won't do that in recruiting. So there are limits to how much data you can gather in the business world on candidates. And you got to kind of like shoot a little bit more from the hip in the business world than you do in sports.
And I know you mentioned in your book is actually a blueprint for how to find the best talent, correct?
That is correct.
So I'm looking at it from the other side of the coin. You tell me if I'm doing the right thing. I'm not a Netflix and I'm not a Google, but I'm probably that group that's called employee. And why is this important to employees? How does this help them?
Because more and more employers are starting to apply an evidence-based approach to their recruiting. And if you're going to be an applicant at a company that applies this approach, it's good for you to know what they're doing so you can prepare yourself for that interview.
I think that's fantastic. And in fact, that's the part I always looked at when I was reading your book, that on the other side, if we know about this, we know how to respond. We know what they're looking for. And I know as we go through the show, you're going to be giving us some fantastic statistics and numbers to back all this up. At this point in the show, I'd just like to remind our listeners that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, and today we're talking to Atta, A-T-T-A, Tarki, T-A-R-K-I. His book is Evidence-Based Recruiting. And Atta, can you tell us where we can get the book and a website where we can find out more information?
Thank you for asking. You can find the book on our company website, eca-partners.com, or on amazon.com just by looking for my name or typing in evidence-based recruiting.
And we'll give that information, or we'll ask you to give it later in the show, so if someone didn't get it and wants to get it down. But I think this is very important because as we're watching sports teams, we know this is the future. The teams that are losing are the teams that are saying, gee, we have to catch up and we have to get our analytics in place, and kind of get our act together. So if you want to be ahead of the curve and if you want that job as an employee, hey, all you have to do is read Atta's book. You're going to know what the boss is looking for and do the right thing. Now, in your book, you mentioned something called the power law of performance. Is that correct? Did I get the term right?
That's right.
Can you tell us what that is and what that means to us?
The power law of performance is that a few select employees are going to produce most of the results for an organization. Excuse me, Bill. So I decided to look at certain data sets and said, okay, how can I illustrate this power law of performance? And I looked at the performance of 24,000 ATP tennis players. And the top 10% of the players there produced some 94% of the results in tennis, took home 94% of the prize money.
Wait, say that again. Give us that number again.
Sorry, come again?
Can you give us that number, those statistics, one more time?
Yes, the top 10% of the players took home 94% of the prize money in tennis.
10% took home 94%. So over 90%, in fact, almost 95%. So the whole rest only got about 5 or 6% of the tennis winnings.
Yeah, so these are 24,000 players. So imagine about 2,000 players, 2,400 players took home all that money, and the rest of the 21,000 players took home, split up 6% of the prize money. And what that means in the business world is if you're hiring a computer engineer, your best computer engineer is not going to be sitting there writing 10,000 times more code than the average engineer. But the value of the code they write could mean that billions of people choose Google every day instead of using Yahoo or Alta Vista or Bing or some other search engine.
That's really shocking when you hear those numbers. And there's going to be more statistics that I think will shock people and maybe change the way they're looking to hire. And we should mention, Atta, you do this with venture capitalists. You've compared with pro tennis players here, but you actually do this in the business world for people who are looking to hire the best and obviously want to get the most production for their money. Is that correct?
That's right. And when I bring up these sport analogies, a lot of people are like, well, that might be true in sports, but it's not going to be true for us. I've seen this happen at so many businesses. And there was a researcher named O'Boyle who looked at the performance of 600,000 professionals across 198 different professions. And he found this relationship to be true in all those sample sizes as well.
And I think that's what it certainly amazed me because I said the same thing. I said, well, maybe this just works in tennis and golf because there usually are a few stars who will take home the big money. If we think of football, we think of Tom Brady, a quarterback who's been playing for 20 years and winning Super Bowls all over the place, etc. But you mentioned this is true for different industries, different types of performance, different jobs. So pretty much chances are if we're going for a position or a job, it's going to be the same for that position just as it is for the New England Patriots or a pro tennis player or a pro golf player, correct?
That is correct, and I'm about to get a very humbling experience in that as an author, because I don't know how many books my book is going to sell, but it's not going to sell millions of copies like the top performers when it comes to authors.
Well, you might have said that before this show, but when people start listening to The Secrets of Success, bestseller right off the top of the list. I would not be surprised if it does fall into the Moneyball category, meaning a top seller, because I found this very interesting, because I would have gotten all these questions wrong if we were doing a TV quiz show, and if you said, what's better, to hire 10 average people or 2 super type people, you know, the analogy would be the pro football or tennis player who's on the top of the pile, I would have gone with the 10 better than average people, figuring that one of them will probably move on, one of them may not pan out, but I still have 8 out of 10. But I now know from reading your book and some of the statistics just how important this is. I think, if I'm right, and you tell me if I copied this down, Netflix said that the really top people are at least 2 times better than average for procedural work, but 10 times better than average for the creative work. Did I get those numbers right?
That's right, and that 10 times better or more productive than an average performer is also something that Google's CEO kept citing all the time.
Now, I think another, and I know you quote a lot of studies, so I'm just summarizing some of them to give people numbers, because I always like to see something backed up by numbers. You say, in general, studies found that top performers are producing 225% to 900% more, productive work in high complexity jobs. So I guess that would mean, for instance, if we're looking for someone like a top chemist or a surgeon, if you get the true top performers, you're actually getting anywhere from 200 to 900%. That would be comparing it 8 or 9 times better than that average performer. So it's almost like hiring 4 or 5 people to do high complex work rather than just one mediocre one. Am I interpreting these numbers in the right way?
That's right. And this comes back to what I was trying to tell you also in the beginning of the show. If you're a hiring manager, resist the temptation to go and put out the different fire that you're dealing with today, and instead spend that half an hour on obsessing about how can I find the best performers in my sector, in my industry, in my geography. And that's going to produce much better results for you than going there and kind of like hiring the first best person that comes along and then think that you can mentor them and coach them to become better performers.
Now, I know for someone who may not believe what you're saying, you actually point out the costs of hiring mistakes, and I think you have a list of direct costs early on in your book. Can you tell us what some of these costs would be, just that we're going to have to absorb them if we don't do it the right way?
Yeah, so the direct cost of a hiring mistake are, of course, the initial hiring and onboarding costs, the direct salary of the person, additional cost, increased cost. So if you need to hire 2 people to do the job of 1 person, that's a direct cost. And lost revenue if you're hiring a salesperson and this person can't sell as well as the better salesperson, and also potential separation costs. They end up leaving your company and you have to pay them a severance or something like that. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The indirect costs are much higher.
Tell us some of those. Now you're scaring us.
Yeah, so the indirect costs are a lot of time costs, time that you lost on an initiative. If you're a company, if you're Blockbuster and you have a new entrant in your market called Netflix, and you want to kind of like launch a product to compete with them, which Blockbuster did, but it just took them 3 years to launch it. That time cost was worth a lot to them. Or the time that your top performers are spending on training these new hires, morale cost to the company. Patty McCord, the former head of talent at Netflix, says the best thing you could do for a top performer is not to kind of like stock the fridge with 12 different flavors of sparkling water. It's to get them to work with more star performers. And if you're hiring not star performers or below average performers, then that morale cost and culture cost is going to be enormous. And then you have reputation risks to customers or future hires. Steve Jobs used to say A players attract A players and B players attract C players.
There was a little trick in the end there. A players attract A players, but what do B players attract?
C players.
C, in other words, dropping down.
Exactly.
That's a very interesting point, and one I think most of us overlook, because people of a similar background do group together, top surgeons, top artists, top creative people. And if you're getting less than that, not only are you losing out on production, but the next people who are going to come in are going to be lesser people and even below that group. Atta, we want to find out more about this, but again, I want to let our audience know, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Atta, A-T-T-A, Tarki, T-A-R-K-I. His book is Evidence-Based Recruiting. You may want to get that down, because if you like what you're hearing, this may be something that can turn your business around, or if you're getting involved in a new business, something that you want to apply before you start making mistakes that he's talking about. And Atta, can you tell us where we can get the book and a website where we can learn more information?
Thanks for asking. You can get the book on eca-partners.com, which is our website, or Amazon by just looking for the name of the book, Evidence-Based Recruiting.
And I'll let our audience know that if you did not hear our full show, or if you'd like to hear it again, you can go to our website and hear a podcast at nccradio.org. Go to nccradio.org, look for The Secrets of Success, and then the show based on evidence-based recruiting. You'll get a chance to listen to it again if there's points you missed or you want to make them to your employer, or if you're the other side of it, you want to make them to your employees. You can bring these points out and tell them you're talking to an expert here, not me, but our guest who knows all about this. And if it's working in professional sports and people are paying $200, $300, $400 million to someone who's the best in their field, maybe we can't afford numbers like that, but it may certainly be worth it to look into it if we can get the best one in our medical practice, our accounting, or our legal practice. Might make our company worth a lot more and all of us a lot happier and a lot richer. Now, when we go to almost any company, we hear signs, or we see signs or hear comments, our employees are important to us. Our employees are our most important product. It seems they have a good vision statement, but reality is different. Why is that? Why does that happen?
That's a very insightful question, Bill. I've been trying to figure that out. And there are a few different explanations that come up. One of them is, well, everyone else is saying it. So if I don't say it, then no one wants to work for me. And it's just one of these things you have to say. But they don't really believe that that's the case. They don't really believe that the employees make a big difference for the company. And the other explanation is they do believe it, but they just don't know how to attract and train and retain the best employees.
Now, I know you mentioned in your book, and I think most of us would think, well, let's just set up a good training program. And to be honest, I would have made that mistake if I hadn't read your book. It would seem to get good people and then train them in the Netflix way or the Google way or the Nordstrom way, whatever company we're representing. But you kind of say corporate training programs are a waste of time. And again, you're the expert on this. You've seen these programs. You go out and help people hire the right people. Why do you say that? Why are they such a waste of time?
Let me ask you this, Bill. If you were given $100 million to set up a new NBA team, would you start with kind of like your buddies and say like, okay, let's start today. Let's not lose any time. And I'm going to kind of like get the best coach ever. And that person is going to train you guys to become the best NBA players ever? Or would you spend a good year trying to recruit the very best players money could buy for you?
Well, knowing my friends, you wouldn't want my friends or my buddies, and certainly no one's going to pay $100 million. If we could get $100 for our group, that would be a surprise, and it would be a win for us, and we would be laughing all the way to the bank. So, no, that's a very good point. And I know you made that analogy in your book. You said, who would you want as a basketball team? And just when we think of that, it becomes so obvious, right? I mean, I think that's a terrific little anecdote that you have. Why would we go out and get mediocre players and try to train them to shoot rather than, and, train them in the rules of the game and specialized skills, when if you get 2 or 3 excellent players, you're certainly going to have a better chance of winning. So I think that's definitely on point. You talk about a total value analysis. I think it's on page 22 in your book. What are some of the questions we should be asking ourselves and that you mention on that total value analysis? Can you tell our audience? Maybe we can apply it tomorrow at work.
Yeah, absolutely. The purpose of the total value analysis is to understand how much our better hires worth to you. Because if you don't know that, and if you don't believe in those numbers, you're going to keep doing what you've been doing all along. And you're not going to invest the resources needed to improve your hiring results. Now, when I'm saying that most corporate training programs are a waste of time and resources, what I want you to do instead is to use those time and resources on your recruiting teams. And some of the questions you can ask yourself to find out how much you should be spending on your recruiting teams and recruiting efforts are, who are some of my best performers? Who are some of my average performers? Who are some of my bottom performers? How much more value do my top performers create for me than my average and bottom performers? And questions around this topic will then help you derive at a number that you can believe in, applies to you and your organization on this is the value I'm missing out on by not spending more time on trying to find more top performers. And there is a detailed calculation in the book that's about 15 rows long. I'm not going to walk the audience through those 15 rows because I don't want them to fall asleep on the radio here.
Well, thank you.
But you could do that.
Well, I think this chart is just terrific because once we start realizing this, you say to yourself, wait a minute, if these are my 3 bottom performers, I'm probably paying each of them a good salary. If I could get one top performer equaling those 3 people's salary or even a little more, maybe even a little less, I'm going to get more of a performance. I'm going to raise up everybody else's performance. And isn't that what we all want? Atta, I think you have a wonderful book. I want our audience to know the name is Evidence-Based Recruiting. It's by our guest, Atta, Atta Tarki, Tarkey, Evidence-Based Recruiting. Atta, thanks so much for being with us today. I think you're going to make all our companies a lot better and a lot more efficient. Thank
you so much for having me.
Oh, it's been our pleasure. We'd like to let our audience know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.